Hey guys, it's Amy and I am back with another video. I hope you're doing well today. Today we are talking about my recommendations for people who are new to fantasy. I know not everybody's into fantasy, but it is my kind of wheelhouse, my comfort place, and I just really enjoy the genre. But if you are wanting to dip your toes into the genre, I have a fairly extensive list that I'm hoping will cover different tastes from wherever your reading taste may come from. But if you're wanting to dip your toes into it, stay tuned and I'm going to get into the list. First up on my list are some series that are action packed, but I feel like are fairly easy to read and I think are just kind of easy to get into and just get absorbed into the world. So these are kind of more action packed fantasy series. And these have, it's a combination of adult and kind of YA. Don't be deterred if you're an adult and I'm recommending YA books. These definitely, I feel like, cater to a wide age group. So don't let the label deter you. But my first recommendation is an adult fantasy series, and that is the Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. There is also a book that came out within the last year, The Fragile Threads of Power, that is also in this world, but this is like the original trilogy that she wrote. And this is such an interesting world. You're dealing with magic that it's really interesting, but it is not complicated to understand. You're kind of reading from the perspective of a couple of main characters, at least in the first book. The cast of characters grow a little bit as the books go on, but you're kind of going through multiple alternate realities of our world. But there's magic in some, there isn't magic in others. And it's just such an interesting world and cast of characters, but you're kind of based in London and you're following a main character who is able to travel between these different versions of London. And he's kind of an adopted son of a king. He's kind of the liaison between these different worlds. And you also follow a female main character who he runs into, who is just a great character. She's kind of chaotic and a little morally gray. But they are kind of thrown into an adventure where they are having to pretty much save their world. So, if that sounds interesting to you, if you want something where it's not like a modern day setting, it's a bit more kind of like 18th century a little bit. But if the idea of like alternate realities sounds interesting to you, world jumping, magic where you're kind of able to transport different places and things like that. There's also like elemental magic in this as well. If any of that sounds interesting to you, and if like it's minor politics, easy to understand magic, but a cast of characters that you really come to love. Sometimes you hate them because they're being annoying, but I mean, we all go through those kind of stages in life, but just characters that are real and grounded and you just want to keep reading their story and find out what happens next. If any of that sounds interesting to you, if you like kind of an action-packed adventure, I would definitely recommend this series. My next book is part of a series, but I've only read the first book, but I enjoyed the first book and I plan to read the rest of the series. But that is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This is the first book of the Scholomance series that she wrote, and I really enjoyed it. It was a fun time. There were times where I had a little bit of difficulty with the writing, but I think I went into it with different expectations. I was expecting a little bit more of like a higher fantasy and it to be a little bit more dark and brooding and everything. And even though there are like kind of dark elements to it in that there are high stakes, this is kind of a just kind of quirky, weird book with strange magic and strange magical characters, a strange school, It's a school where there are really high stakes, but there aren't any teachers to help these kids out. It is like a high school, but there's no teachers. And it is an adult fantasy, but you're dealing with like high school aged kids. The female main character is absolutely hilarious. She's really snarky, and she's in kind of a weird position where she doesn't want to make friendships or alliances just for tactical advantage, like a lot of other people are in the book. She's wanting real, genuine friendships, but she's also kind of on the outs because she kind of has like a darker, weird magic. She's been prophesied to be kind of an evil sorceress, and she doesn't want anything to do with that. But she's just kind of on the outs with people. She's trying to navigate this really strange world where there is a lot of competition, and there are people that have aligned together to help protect themselves, these groups called enclaves. Just the friendships that she develops, and just the crazy situations that they get into, the really weird and scary creatures that are in this school. There's just a lot going on. But if you like the idea of a magical school with fierce competition, with strange creatures, just kind of an adventure aspect to it with a lot of humor in there, I think that you would really enjoy this book. My next series is a YA fantasy series, and I have come to really enjoy this author's writing. I read this YA series I'm about to recommend, and I've read her adult fantasy, kind of historical fictions as well. And what I'm recommending is The World of the Narrows series by Adrienne Young. If you like pirate, if you like high seas adventure, you are going to really enjoy this series. There really isn't a ton of magic in it. It is kind of a low key part of this series, but I definitely would categorize this as fantasy. We're kind of in a fantasy world, and you're following a female main character who was abandoned by her father, and she's trying to make her way in the world and get back to him, prove to him that she is worthy of being on his ship. And they don't call themselves pirates, but they pretty much are. But you're dealing with like jewel trade and a few different other like trades, but everybody's on like the high seas and there's a lot of competition. And there's a little bit of romance in this book as well. I ate this series up. I listened to the audiobooks and I listened to them back to back. I thoroughly enjoy this. I'm a sucker for pirates, but if the idea of like pirates sounds interesting to you, a little bit of romance in there, a little bit more just subtle on the magic. It's really not a huge part of the world, but it's there. But characters that are a little bit angsty, definitely interesting. There's depth to the characters. There's a bit of a mystery kind of element to it. A high seas adventure. If any of that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend this series. I absolutely love it. My last recommendation in this action packed category is the Paper Magician series by Charlie Holmberg. This, I believe, is categorized as YA. I think maybe it could be considered the category of new adult, where it's kind of in between YA and adult. But this is a little bit of an older series, but I absolutely loved it. We listened to it with another YouTuber, the Bearded Book Club here on YouTube. Our friend Trey. He is such a great guy, and he read through this series. My husband and I were listening to it together, and we just absolutely loved it. It was such a good series. You're dealing with a really interesting kind of magic. This kind of has like some historical fiction elements to it, but you're dealing with a girl who is kind of becoming an apprentice of magic. And there's different types of magic that are based on like metal or paper. I'm blanking on some of the other ones, but it's kind of an elemental magic, I guess. It's just a really interesting magic system, but it's not difficult to understand. But this is like historical fiction inspired with a little bit of romance, a little bit of magic, a little bit of a mystery element to it. There are 3 books to the original series. I think there is an additional book, or she wrote another book that is within this world. I believe it's The Plastic Magician. This is like a trilogy, I believe, on its own. So you can just read that separately. But I really loved the characters in this book. I really enjoyed the romance in this book. There's definitely some higher stakes, there's adventure, there's mystery. There's just a lot of really great elements to this book. But I feel like it's a good introductory fantasy because it's not super complex. There's not like super complex politics or anything like that. And not to say that it's like dumbed down. None of these are like dumbed down. It's just that they're not super complicated where it's like you're having to have like a list of characters and a glossary of definitions for terminology and things like that. That's my last one for the action-packed fantasies. Next up is a category that I'm calling low key, as in it's just kind of, it's not super high stakes. There are some stakes in these books, but it's not super high stakes like the action packed books. And I'm calling it low key with romance. So there's a bigger romance element to these books. And I really love these books. They are just kind of heartwarming, but kind of quirky at the same time. But my first recommendation is the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett. There are 2 books in this series so far. I believe there are more to come. But you are following our main character, Emily Wilde, who is a scholar of dryadology, or the study of fairies, at the University of Cambridge. And she is going out and doing like field research, field studies of different types of fae. And it's written from like journal entries. That's kind of the perspective that you're getting. And I just really enjoyed the writing style. And she is definitely like a little antisocial, a little quirky, a little grumpy. If you've heard of like the romance trope of like grumpy sunshine, she is definitely the grumpy character. And then her sort of academic rival colleague, he is kind of the sunshine to her grumpy. They are just really great characters together. I feel like they balance each other out really well. And she just kind of goes on this really interesting adventure in studying these fae. She gets into some different situations that are kind of, there are some stakes to it for sure. I feel like it's not as intense as some of the other books that I've recommended already. But if the idea of kind of a scholarly adventure, getting a little bit nerdy, but not too complicated or anything like that, it's just kind of a low key adventure with some kind of academic vibes to it and some romance in there, I would definitely recommend this book. Next up is one that I would recommend that is a bit more on the romance side, and that is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This, I believe, is considered adult, but there's no like spice in it. It's just a sweet romance. You have fae or fairies in there, and this girl was cursed when she was younger, and half of her soul was stolen by a fae. And so she kind of goes through life experiencing the world different from the average person. She doesn't really experience emotions like most people do, and just kind of has a hard time connecting with people. But she is a really sweet character, and she definitely cares about people. She cares about the people that she loves. But she comes connected with a man who is known as like the magician of the royal court. We're kind of dealing with like Regency London. He is a fae himself, and they're kind of thrown into a situation together. And you can probably see where the story is going to go from there. It's just a really sweet romance. When we get into more of the magic part of the book, when we get into the magic realm, so to speak, it almost has like a whimsical, almost Alice in Wonderland kind of weird feel to it. That's the best I can think to describe it. You're kind of dealing with like Regency England, and then there's like a magical world that has this kind of quirky, whimsical vibe to it. I really enjoyed this book because it wasn't like super high fantasy, but there was a fantasy element to it. I really enjoyed the romance and the characters. It even touches on some social issues as well that you were dealing with in Regency England, where you're dealing with like socioeconomic issues and class issues, corruption of wealth, and things like that. And I feel like it was done in a really, really good way. So, if any of that sounds interesting to you, kind of a historical romance with a little bit of magic, I would definitely recommend this book. Last on my list is a category that has become pretty popular within the last couple of years, and that is cozy fantasy. This is something where it's very low stakes. It's just kind of a cozy, like warm hug of a book. There's a little bit of magic in there and just some really like heartwarming story and characters. And I really love this category of book, even as someone who likes high fantasy. It's getting like a warm hug in a book, and it's just really like heartwarming and obviously cozy. That's why it's called cozy fantasy. But my first recommendation, I feel like, has become kind of the quintessential book of this category, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I have the sequel, Bookshops and Bone Dust. I haven't read it yet, but if you like Legends and Lattes, there is another book in this world as well, so you can get more of it. But Legends and Lattes is about an orc who was kind of an arms for hire mercenary type uh, character, and she wants to give up that life and start a coffee shop. She's been to all different realms within the world, and she's bringing coffee to a place where coffee really isn't known. And so she's introducing like the idea of coffee in a coffee shop to this cute little village, and just the characters that she becomes friends with and the cozy little coffee shop that she builds. It's so heartwarming. It's so sweet. I absolutely love it. There's a little bit of a sapphic romance in here as well that's really sweet. I just really love this book. I'm honestly tempted to read it again, but I need to read the sequel to the book, which it's actually kind of a prequel from my understanding, but I just really, really love this book. If the idea of like a cozy coffee shop with like pastries and really cute creatures, magical creatures and characters sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend this book. Last on my list is a book that is so heartwarming and a little bit heart-wrenching at the same time. I really love this author's writing. It is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I absolutely fell in love with this book. It is about a man who works in like the Department of Magic that deals with it. He's working in the government, in the department that deals with magic, magical creatures in this world. And he kind of is like a social worker, so to speak, for these magical beings. And he checks up on like orphans. And there is an orphanage that he is assigned to investigate where some magical creatures are held. And like magical creatures, magical beings, people are kind of ostracized in the society. And he really just sees people, he sees these orphans, these children, just kind of as like another case file. He doesn't necessarily connect with them, but he does care about them and want proper care for these kids that he is working for and advocating for. But the story that unfolds as he becomes part of the life of these orphans and their caretaker, the little island that they live on, is just so sweet and so heartwarming. And again, heart-wrenching at times. All of these different kids are different types of magical creatures, and they all have their own interesting and kind of heart-wrenching story. The caretaker kind of goes against the norm and the rules. And there is a little bit of a romance in there as well, a queer romance. And it's all just so heartwarming and sweet. And I can't say enough about the book. I feel like I'm saying heartwarming and sweet 100 times, but that's really what it is. And I absolutely loved it. There are some like religious controversies in here, so just be aware of that. I can't say enough about this book. It was just so well written. You just absolutely fall in love with the characters. And there is a sequel coming out. I don't recall the name of it or when it's coming out, but I know it's coming out, I think, in the next like year or two. And I cannot wait to read it, to continue the story with these characters. But if this idea of kind of a found family, dealing with some interesting magical creatures, some funny, heartwarming moments, a tiny bit of romance in there, if any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend this book. So, guys, that was my fairly extensive list of books for new fantasy readers. I definitely stand by these recommendations. If any of these sound interesting to you, definitely let me know in the comments. Or if you've dipped your toes into fantasy, let me know what was your introduction to fantasy, or if it's new to you, what have you read so far? I want to chat with you in the comments. I definitely love this discussion because it's been a newer thing for me in the past year or so, and I have just really enjoyed the journey into fantasy. So let me know in the comments your thoughts about these books, what sounds interesting, and all the good things that we can talk about. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye.